All right, Right to Protest has joined several other organizations condemning the excessive use of force and interdicts that limit the right to protest, especially at institutions of higher learning. It follows weeks of protests by students at various campuses. Well, let's now hear from Omhle Ntshingila, acting project coordinator at Right to Protest. Omhle, hello to you and appreciate your time this Sunday afternoon. And I would have imagined the right to protest is entrenched in our constitution, yet here we are with those on campus, police and security guards, some would argue university management, arguing against it. How did we get to this point?
Well, Gareth, it's quite a very hostile, very volatile situation of how we got to this point, because these mistakes that are happening on campus enforced by the South African Police Services should not be mistakes that are happening in our current democratic dispensation. There is too much information and assistance available to the state apparatus to help them respond better, well, and in a just way when it comes to crowd control during protest action.
So where do we now start to take this forward to ensure that the right to protest is not being superseded by what universities and private security on the ground are trying to prevent? Because it is anyone's right to protest, of course, but the universities are coming out and saying that due to obstruction of learning and preventing access to certain entrances, they have a right to protect the infrastructure. So which law outweighs which?
There isn't a law that outweighs the other one. What I think is happening in most higher learning institutions is that there is no engagement that is adequately done with students when it comes to their challenges, because protest is used by students or the general broader society as the last resort after trying everything they can to engage in order to get their issues or their challenges resolved. And I don't think universities or higher learning institutions are spending enough time engaging student bodies such as SRC or political student organizations adequately to get the issues on the ground resolved before they embark on protest action.
And once we're in the protest action, though, which is sad, Omhle, because we've seen this most notably at WITS, we have private security and SAPS and even JMPD on the ground, but I have also seen firsthand that often out of frustration, because of exactly what you're talking about, the engagements are not fruitful. So what we see is students, some, not all, some frustrated students, for example, throwing stones and water bottles. Some are suggesting deliberately antagonizing the security. What would your response be to that?
Well, Gareth, what we've seen in history and what history shows us is that public order policing has been very violent during protest action. And this has resulted in killings in Marikana, killings of a bystander at WITS University, and the recent injury of two students who were arrested at the University of Free State. How protesters use different strategies in order to protect themselves during the disproportionate use of excessive force then can be nuanced and more deliberated. But it clearly shows that during protest, there is power dynamics, and these power dynamics are caused by who is armed and who is unarmed during protest action. And during those times, it's mostly police and private security personnel who are armed during protest action. And private security personnel do not have the jurisdiction to engage in crowd control. And that is a monopoly that belongs to public order policing alone.
When we were at WITS, we were on the steps of the Great Hall. In fact, I was with Pulile Sweetie Jones, and there was a very clear difference between what we were witnessing as far as SAPS, private security, and JMPD. And then on the steps of the Great Hall, and we have visuals to back this up, there were other members of some kind of security force that the students were telling us they didn't even recognize. They didn't know who these people were. They weren't part of the ordinary security. So in a case like that, would WITS have gone too far in bringing unknown security onto campus to the point where the students admitted they had no idea who these people were. So if things had gone terribly wrong, they wouldn't even be able to identify them. That doesn't sound like dealing in good faith.
That's definitely what our statement stated as a concern that we've seen not only just in one particular university, but throughout different higher learning institutions where there are many security forces that are deployed outside of the already existing protection services that are instated inside universities. This is very concerning because, as I said, private security companies do not have the type of training that is needed during protest action. And we are seeing a lot of human rights violations coming from private security because, one, lack of training, but two, the lack of response or the delayed response by SAPs to come on the ground to be in charge of crowd controlling and the dispersing of protesters on time in different universities.
Well, as I say goodbye to you then, I would like to turn the conversation the other way around as well and ask you this, Omhle, how would you suggest a university protects the right to protest, but also should handle better? And I know you said there should be better negotiation and more open dialogue, but open dialogue doesn't help when you've got two opposing forces going head to head. How should a university go ahead and try and limit and prevent any kind of excessive force while also protecting infrastructure and preventing other pupils and other students from being intimidated? I understand you and I are walking a very, very tight line here, but something has to give. What should the university be doing better to do it better for themselves? And two, how should the students prevent provoking security?
I think universities need to go back and review their own policies when it comes to how protests should be facilitated on campus. And these policies should be a consultative process with student organizations on campus and with the broader student population on campus. Universities should be guided by the Constitution and the Regulations Gathering Act when also assessing and reviewing these sorts of processes of allowing and facilitating the right to protest on campus. Thereon, the university should be spending a lot of time adequately engaging with students and the type of student issues that may arise before protest action, or in any case when there are certain things that might agitate students towards protest. I think universities should invest more of its time in speaking to students and having an open line of communication and resolving issues and bringing more intervention to student issues on campuses. And I think that will actually help in seeing a less of a use of excessive force on campus when there is dialogue. The shrinking civic space should not also be seen on university campuses because university campuses, in a broader sense, are also spaces of protest. The right to protest is not limited for off-campus activities alone, and universities should fully understand this.
And I appreciate your time for joining me this afternoon on eNCA. Omhle Ntshingila, Acting Project Coordinator at Right to Protest, just giving us a sense of how students have been reacting and, more importantly, how universities have been reacting or not reacting, one could argue, is the bigger issue at various campuses around the country. Most notably over the past few weeks has been Wits University.